Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Elliott, members of council and members of the community who are joined us today. My name is Heather Boxford, Chief Financial Officer here at the district, and I'm joined today by Roland Russell, Senior Financial Analyst, Christina Moore, Director of Communications, and Sam Fordham, Public Engagement Specialist. So in terms of agenda today, although it looks pretty light in subject matter, we do have a lot to cover. First, Ms. Moore and Mr. Fordham will review the 2023 budget survey results, and then myself and Mr. Russell will review the 5-year general fund operating budget and respective tax impacts. The primary objective today is to obtain council endorsement to include the budgets for both the non-discretionary and service level change outlined in the budget package and reviewed today into the 2023 to 2027 financial plan. As well, to obtain council endorsement to utilize the protective services provision to assist with smoothing in the Squamish fire rescue service level change into the 2023 to 2027 financial plan. So a reminder to where we are at in the budget cycle. We have several steps in the process that has been completed. The first review of the capital and the received endorsement for utilities and the SLRD requisitions. And then we still have the special operating projects and a second review of the capital coming ahead next week on September 27th. And so with that, I will hand it over to Ms. Moore and Mr. Fordham to review the 2023 survey results.
Thank you, Ms. Boxford. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Christina Moore, Director of Communications, and Sam Fordham, Public Engagement Specialist. As mentioned, we're here to review the survey results from the recent budget survey. This was an opportunity for us to invite some community input to learn a little bit about their priorities. As we get, as discussions get underway and council deliberates on the 2023 to 2027 financial plan. The survey was designed to encourage residents to think about their values and their priorities and think about trade-offs as it related to funding certain projects over others. So I have several slides that take us through the presentation that was attached to your agenda. And there is an opportunity at the end, of course, for discussion and questions. But if there are specific questions on any specific survey questions, feel free to interrupt if that's council's preference along the way. Okay. We will get started. So the survey was open between August 14th and September 12th. And again, the goal was to gain some understanding of where the community's priorities lie. 194 completed responses were received online. Of note, which we'll refer to at the end of this presentation, we did receive 2 additional surveys that were submitted by paper copy. And so I will speak to those at the end specifically. Next slide. The age of the respondents varied. The biggest grouping was between the ages of 30 and 39 with 35%. As you can see below, the next largest group was between the ages of 40 to 49 at 26%. The groups between 60 to 69 and 70 plus totaled 19% in total. 50 to 59, 16%, and younger than 29 and younger, only 4.1%. So definitely an interesting statistic in terms of how the younger population, the younger demographic of our community is not overly represented in this survey. Area of town. Next slide, please. The area of town is quite varied, as you can see here. The largest group, of course, from the Garibaldi Highlands and University Heights. Second, the downtown Sea to Sky area, Sea and Sky area, and then Garibaldi Estates, Tantalus Road, and Sky Ridge area being the third highest respondents. Next slide. So a quick slide for each question here. The first one asked residents to select their top 5 priority areas of the budget for funding in 2023 to 2027. It provided a range of options. 18 operational areas were listed, and I know the slide is the chart is difficult to read on the slide. It is the same one that was in the agenda package, and as a summary, the top 5 areas to invest in were the recreation facilities and programming in the pink there, active transportation, which referred to pedestrian and bike infrastructure, parks, and then TIDE was land use planning and development services, as well as climate adaptation and mitigation. The next 3 questions were open-ended questions. This first question asked people if they had any further explanation or they would like to provide any further comments on the previous question around the operational areas. We found that in this question, people really just took the opportunity to restate what they had prioritized in the first question. And while this isn't a complete list, it is the top of the list in terms of the comments that were mostly received, or most frequently received, excuse me. Question 3. Question 3 and 4 really tried to get to the idea of trade-offs. Question 3 be asking if you could increase funding for one project or initiative in 2023, what would that be? As you can see from these slides, we did see a majority of respondents speak to recreation, either the recreation facility, the Brennan Park Recreation Center upgrade specifically. That also included a new ice rink or a new pool, which was itemized further down in this list, as well as parks and recreation generally, which spoke to the comments varied from everything from programming to play structures. Kids resources were referenced a lot in terms of indoor play centers, and just a general support for upgrading all recreation facilities beyond the natural assets and infrastructure that we have, such as trails and climbing areas. Question 4, the trade-off part of it was so to allow for the increase that was prioritized in the question above, what is one project or initiative you would decrease funding for? And this topic certainly received a lot of responses around don't know or don't decrease anything, and that was one of the themes here. I think the arts, culture, and heritage showed up high here. The sense from the comments was that while support for arts, culture, and heritage was high, it ended up on this list based on the idea that funding could come from other sources. Was the takeaway there. Okay, question 5, of the operational areas listed below, this idea was to gauge perception of where the community felt that we were spending enough, too much, or not enough in each area. The yellow bar in the middle refers to enough. The pink bar on the far left refers to unsure. The purple, too much, and then the green, not enough. So this provides some sense of where the community feels that we spend enough and where they would like to see more investment in funding. The second slide, if you could advance the slide, this is the second part of that question, just to show the the full number of topics that were represented. Question 6 invited the community to speak, to provide some input into projects that were being considered for using community amenity contributions in this financial plan, and whether or not the community felt that these projects were, the question about whether or not the community supported whether or not these projects should be funded from community amenity contributions. So again, the far left under pink is unsure. The middle purple is strongly support, and then followed by somewhat support in yellow, and then do not support in green. Slide. And then this question, another open-ended question, asked the community to further expand on that question. So were there other projects that were not listed above that you would suggest or like to see funded through community amenity contributions? And again, we saw the recreation facilities at the top of the list. This is a question that we have asked in previous budget surveys, and that this looks at the community's perception as to where they would like to see council lobbying the province for additional resources and support. In this case, affordable housing, healthcare, and childcare were quite significantly higher than some of the other areas. The other areas included, you can't quite read this chart again, but it is in the agenda package. Campsites and recreation sites, high gas prices, highway intersection safety, opioid harm reduction, mental health and addictions, regional transit, long-term care, and then there was another category as well. Again, an open-ended question to give people an opportunity to further explain their answers. For the most part, this was another opportunity for the community to reinforce what they had spoken about previously. And again, healthcare, affordable housing, and childcare were the most referenced there. We also took this opportunity to speak to gauge the community's understanding of our facilities needs over the coming years. Before reading the question, there was an opportunity for the community to read some information about the real estate and facilities master plan and some of the resources that we do have online as it relates to this plan. And then they were asked a question about their level of awareness. With pink being that they knew about the district's significant facility upgrade needs, as well as the plan to complete the upgrades. Purple being that they knew about the district's significant facility needs, but did not know that there was a plan to replace them. Yellow being that they knew about the district's facility needs, but did not realize how many. And then green did not know about the district's significant facility needs at all. And this final question was really to gauge where the community currently receives their information. This is always useful as we work to share these surveys and education materials and information. And in this, through this survey, friends and neighbors was significantly the highest at 106 responses. And then newspaper advertisements and articles in second there. When we look at our website and our weekly newsletter, that showed quite a good showing, and then combined our social media channels. If we look at the Facebook district, Instagram, and Twitter, you can see those further down too. The Facebook is in purple, Twitter down in pink, Instagram in the first blue there. Let's Talk Squamish is the first time we've been able to include this on this kind of question, which is our engagement platform where this survey was hosted. And we're seeing in relation to some of our other channels, we're seeing it showing fairly well against the more popular channels like Facebook and the e-newsletter and squamish.ca. So that's a continued focus that we will work on in terms of continuing to drive people to that site and create an account so that they can engage on this and various other engagements. As mentioned, we did receive 2 additional paper copies received. The comments will be added to the appendix for council and staff. Overall, these additional paper copies did not change the topic rankings, and the comments highlighted in those spoke to the importance of mental health resources, accessibility as it relates to a Brennan Park future upgrade, funding for bylaw enforcement and police, and then the need for climate adaptation and mitigation funding from the province. And we just wanted to make sure that those comments were captured as they weren't part of the original budget package. And then budget engagement absolutely continues throughout the coming weeks. We will continue to share information on the Let's Talk Squamish platform. We're also encouraging people to ask questions through that platform, and we are responding and answering them as they come up. And then the interactive budget tool continues to be populated. It's a great way for the community to scroll around the projects and learn about what is being proposed over the coming 5 years. That is it for the slides. Thank you.
All right, so council, we'll just start with question on the engagement survey. Councillor Herford and Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. My video is working now too, in case anyone's wondering. Thank you for the presentation. A couple things jumped out at me. I was curious to see the 30 to 39 category score so high for me, and then sort of that grouped and outscore the 2 groups that make up the 50 to 70 category. And I wondered if that jumped out for you as well, and how perhaps the tool we're using for outreach, if it accurately represent like just generally that 50 to 70 category, I would expect to make up a higher percentage, and just staff's thoughts on that.
Through the mayor. That number is actually reflective of the larger group that we have registered on the platform. So 30 to 39. I can do a test. Sounds a bit better. Okay. So that 30 to 39 demographic is actually the largest group we have registered on the platform. It's fairly close in numbers to the 40 to 49 or the 50 to 59, but that is the largest demographic that we have engaging with us on Let's Talk Squamish.
And I'll add to that. So I think maybe your question is, are we reaching the broader population with the platform? That's a great question. I think that surveys like this help us to understand who we are reaching, and then making, our efforts can be more targeted and focused to reach other areas, other age groups. Certainly the younger age group is something that we want to continue to grow as well. The less than 29 is a very low showing at 4%. Certainly we have initiatives now that the district is working with the Squamish Youth Council to try to reach that younger voice. We tend to see a lot more interaction and participation from the younger demographics on Instagram versus on a platform like Facebook, for example, as well as yeah, that's my point there. I think, one of the things we have learned a lot about over the summer, and even just speaking with residents anecdotally, is the the focus and opportunity we have through our media, our more traditional media, with the chief delivering weekly to homes. We saw a big impact with the Public Works information campaign, for example, through the work that we had done in the chief, and that does seem to be an area that we can continue to use to raise awareness.
Thank you. Yeah, my concern is that we're and I really like the report. So I'm just trying to figure out how much to lean on it as we go through this. So I'm concerned we're missing that 50 to 70 category, and I don't know how we close that loop, because generally that's a very engaged part of our community, and I'm not seeing them reflected. I don't feel accurately in this, and that might just be a technology barrier, or I don't know, but that's the concern there. So on that sort of same line, does the reporting allow the chart that highlighted this split? Are you able to filter the answers through those categories just to see that, say, the 50 to 70s that did respond, does that change how did their answers rank compared to the overall? Just to sort of further maybe give weight to either individual categories. Anyways, it doesn't necessarily need to be those. That's what I'm focusing on. But do you follow the question? Can you do that level with it, or is there value in doing so?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we could. There are ways to drill down into the survey so that we could just filter results from that 50 to 59 age group, or the 50 to 69 age group, and present the results from just that perspective. That would take just more time, but if that was, if there was a particular area that that council wanted to drill into, that we could make that effort for sure. It should allow us to do that. Hey.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know the value of doing that yet till we've done it, to see if it's substantively different than what we're working with when we look at the overall group. But I just that group being so getting so little representation in seems to go against what I'm expecting in public engagement input into things like budgets. So maybe it's a victory and we're getting more people on, but I feel like it might be less of that category contributing, but I'm not sure how to reconcile that myself. So anyways, thank you. So far, I'll leave it there.
I've got a few people on the list, but when we passed our diversity, equity, and inclusion motion, we asked that our engagement start to pursue understanding better how all the different demographics in our community feel. And so I guess from that perspective, how could you see this survey changing next year? Because what might be important to someone with an income of 40,000, and we don't ask about household income, but they might care more about transit than someone who is living in the Highlands and their household income is 200,000. So I think, how do we understand both a little bit more about who's answering the survey and what's important to young people, what's important to seniors, what's important to high income people versus low, because we're trying to distribute our budget dollars equitably, not necessarily equally. And I just wonder if you have some thoughts going forward. And then I've got Councillor Stoner, Councillor Pettengill, and Councillor Race.
Thank you for the question. Through the mayor, I think that what we would need to do is just build more time into the survey timeframe. That is doable. There's, we've had some great success over the summer and spring with pop-ups and different examples of ways to get the survey in front of people. And so that comes with time and really just time. So that's something that perhaps we can look at with the budget process, getting an earlier start so that we can do, a bigger, more comprehensive outreach. Time frame as well. We were this started in mid-August, which isn't a great time because people are on vacation. And of course, we did need to wrap it up to be able to provide some input to the process. So I think, again, planning around time frame and maybe a longer time period to try some of those more in-person activities.
Councillor Stoner?
Thank you. Just on that previous point in conversation, I think it'd also be interesting to expand a little bit of the questions around better understanding who's responding to the survey so that we can break down the results over time. My question was with respect to the number of responses that we received, 194 this year. I'm just wondering if you can put that into context to previous years, if you have any kind of ballpark, if that's kind of where we normally are at, or if it's lower or higher.
Sure, thanks for the question. Through the mayor, yes, I have those numbers. We're a little lower. 2019 was 237 responses. 2020 was 251 responses. You know, one of the things that we did require this year was that the survey be held on the Let's Talk platform. We are trying to build value in that platform and build membership in that platform. It helps to build accountability because people have to create an account, and then we do have the opportunity to do more tracking and speak to those individuals in the future and invite them into other engagements. The downside of that is that you do have to register an account in order to complete the survey, and so I think that that's where we may have seen a decrease this year. Over time, as we're building value in that platform and building that membership, we hope to see that increase again.
And just a quick follow-up, can you just speak to the channels that we use to advertise the survey?
Sure. We advertised it through our Let's Talk Squamish platform to the database that was already registered, as well as the chief newspaper, as well, and our social media sites and our newsletter. We did also run a digital advertisement through some of the online media channels, which was a clickable link to encourage people to participate.
Councillor Pettengill?
Yeah, thanks. I had some similar questions / comments about, you know, wanting to understand a bit better the income level, gender, ethnicity, and so on of, you know, was there groupings or trends? But related to that, do we have a sense of what number of responses we need to make this statistically relevant? Like, we're just too far away from enough surveys to really make that meaningful, or are we closer? Do we know?
So to create a statistically relevant survey would require us to jump quite significantly in terms of resources and costs. Because we run so many surveys and engagements over the course of the year, this type of survey where the community is invited to participate voluntarily without being you know, called or emailed through a survey research company, is obviously much more cost effective and able to be managed within the budgets. We have surveyed other communities in terms of, you know, we haven't surveyed other communities, but we have looked to other communities across the community. We're part of a group that a nationwide group that discusses public engagement efforts and initiatives. And this type of survey tends to be what municipalities are generally using. Because of the cost effectiveness of it. If we wanted to move to a more statistically relevant survey, that would increase the cost quite significantly.
Okay, thank you. I mean, yeah, I would really like to understand it. Are there populations we're missing or overrepresenting, but don't have a sense if we're even in the ballpark of enough responses to make that meaningful or not. So I'd want to also be cautious about putting too much weight in that information. This may be question where the answer comes back later, but I was curious about some of the comments about cricket. My recollection or my understanding is that some people are playing cricket, and that in our master fields plan, there's maybe not, if I'm correct, not plans for specific cricket pitches, but multi-purpose fields that are suitable for that. I'm just wondering if someone can remind me of, am I remembering that correctly, or do we know what is in the pipeline on that?
I do not have that information. I'm not sure if there's another member of staff who might be available to answer that.
I see Ms. Guest has popped up on the screen. It's whoever speaks first. I know how much staff love answering our questions. No, no one.
Wasn't sure if I was
Well-
getting the nod.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the question, Councillor, and the rest of staff. Indeed, cricket has been a sport that is definitely emerging in the last little while, and they're doing a great job of self-organizing right now. And I have no doubt that there will be considerations and further conversations around the emerging sport across all of our fields and amenities in years to come.
Councillor Rees.
Thank you. Just first on on the point raised by Councillor Herford and Mr. Fordham's reply that the survey demographics tend to match the demographics of our platform. But I'm wondering, do they also match or roughly correlate to our census demographics with the different breakdowns? When I looked at that, apart from the lack of participation of the younger people, it's sort of, and I don't recall the census specifically, but it sort of struck me as being roughly the way the town is broken down age-wise in those groupings. And so I didn't see anything dramatically different there apart from that very young sector. But do we relate it at all to the census data to see what's actually out there versus what's registered on our platform versus what turns up to respond?
Through the mayor, I think that's a great question, and I think we'll have to take that away and do that comparison. But that's an excellent way that we can cross-reference that. So we'll take that away.
Thank you. The second point was, and I don't know that a survey is the way, but in a communication issue generally, and maybe it's just because there's an election, but it seems that over the past year, on a number of different fronts, capital improvements and things like this, and is there going to be a second road access to the highway? And I think if people really start counting, it would be the fourth access, not the second. And things like that in the community, and which I've regarded sort of as people just being basically misunderstanding things or not bothering to understand things or things like that. But it's a little late now because we're here today, but sort of, in the future, with some of our capital project decisions, they're all related to budget eventually, or budget decisions we've made or are going to make. And I'm just wondering, and I don't expect an answer today, actually, because I think it's just more of a kind of an introspection. If we have something more that we want to do to focus the community on some of these things than we've done over the last couple of years, just because for me, all of these misinformed people out there that seem to pop up here and there in different media and so forth, and social media, you just wonder where they've been, or don't they pay attention, or is there some way that we're somehow not able to reach them? And I don't know the answer to that, really. I think that's been one of the more surprising things for me over the past year, is how uninformed people are on some of the, I think, major initiatives that are going on in our community that we're spending money on, and in this budget, spending money on again. More of a comment than a question, I guess.
Do you have any thoughts on the comment?
Through the mayor, I do. we do. And, you know, we have made some of the same observations. One of the things that I noted on question 5, when we asked people to whether or not we spend enough, too much, or not enough in a given area, the largest group of unsure in terms of they don't know whether we spend too much or too little was the water and wastewater maintenance and replacement. And, you know, certainly I think of over the years how much we talk about water main replacements and capital projects and things like that. And it's, you know, you kind of scratch your head. You're like, what else can we do? So it's absolutely something that we think about. I think, again, I'll refer back to the work that we've just completed with the Public Works project. The amount of effort that it takes for to get your messages through in this very cluttered world of information it takes a lot of time and effort. I think one of the wonderful things about the District of Squamish is there's so much great work that's being done. We tend to be competing with ourselves for all of our own messaging, whether it be one area over another. So it's just it's an ongoing challenge for us to find creative ways to reach people. I was really excited to see the community response to the pop-ups that we did through the spring and early summer at the farmers market, for example. And I think that there's moving forward in the post-COVID world, we can be out in the community more, and that may be another way to hammer home some of these missing pieces that people would find maybe more interesting through a conversation. We've also had some success, and there was one comment actually in the comments that talked about how helpful the infographics were in the chief newspaper that we ran through the Public Works campaign as well. So again, we're always trying to improve, fine-tune, be more creative to reach people. But there's a lot of competing messages out there from the district and beyond. And
I want to leave enough time for our budget discussion. So I'll quickly go to Councillor Anderson first, and then you, Councillor Pango.
Excuse me. Ms. Moore, I wonder if you may be able to refer or call up your question 5, Q5 slide. There were 2, I believe. The first one is the one I had in mind. So these are the 18 operational areas with the color coding for the response. And my interest here is where the unsures land. And yes, I believe it's the one previous, please. Yes, this one. Now, my question is whether it might be considered next time to give some consideration to differentiating these among these 18 operational areas, because if we note where the unsures are, they're in very large, broad categories of community services: fire and rescue, emergency planning, water and wastewater, economic development, climate adaptation, land use planning and development services. What would the member of the public think immediately of what that means, actually, that latter group? So my notion or my question is whether some attention might be given to some differentiation or identification of comparables. Maybe there's a more of a breakdown. Now, we don't want to make it a giant project and a clumsy one and a long survey, but it seems to me that it would be more useful than, as we see a very clear pattern of a high number of unsure responses there.
Do you have an example you could give of what you're thinking? How
Well,
would you break down fire rescue?
Yes, well, I was giving some thought to that, and just briefly, active transportation and arts, cultural, and heritage might be another qualitatively different category, and road maintenance, transit services, and bylaw enforcement might be another. And I'm just off the top of my head. But the concern I have is a large number of unsures, and maybe it's understandable for such large category of programs. And when we see a lot of unsure and not a lot of support for fire and rescue, that sort of thing.
Through the mayor, we can certainly take a look at that. That's a good point. I think part of it is that education. Maybe there's more of a preamble that we can provide, kind of just in time learning to help build some education around the areas of the budget as well. So we'll take that point. Thank you.
If I may, Mayor, just briefly, maybe a comment or a question. Arts, cultural, and heritage, and you've highlighted that the low support response. And I note a couple of things. We do have a strategy document called Arts, Culture, Heritage. And it's reasonable enough that we would borrow the same phrasing for example, this survey. But in fact, for most people, and indeed in the survey response, most people have mentioned arts. The large majority of comments just refer to arts. Arts generally you associate with visual arts, with programming, not with facility space, cultural functions. And this is where what my point really is that the aspects of culture that are associated with facilities and spaces might be missed. They may not immediately come to mind with the concept of arts. In Whistler, they don't use the term arts. They subsume both heritage and arts under culture. And that is a deliberate strategy, and it is a communication strategy for the department at Whistler. Maybe it's a suggestion. Thank you.
Councillor Bengal.
Yeah, just pardon me, building on Councillor Race's question, comment, and the response to the public works engagement. Does the budget that we will be seeing have room or expectations that we might continue that sort of type of engagement or level of engagement, maybe on different topics, but throughout, or is that something that might come in subsequent years?
Through the mayor, that's a great question. I think there's no new budget being requested, but I think what we would look at is how to shift resources within our existing department. As I mentioned previously with Councillor Race's question, I think we're always trying to refine and tweak and improve upon the communications outreach and really look at our channels and devote resources to the appropriate channel based on where we're seeing the patterns and the results.
All right. Thank you very much. I think one of the things that I noticed was how much people get their information from friends and neighbors. That surprised me a lot. And if those friends and neighbors aren't well informed, then we're really in big trouble. So it does make me think about the different ways we reach people. And I know things that I think everyone must know about because they've had a lot of play on social media. I talk to people and they say to me, oh, I didn't read that in the chief. Or I didn't hear that from anybody. So I think, it's paying attention and realizing that not everyone is everywhere. And as my colleagues have said, trying to figure out the demographics, who's using what, I think will help us target our communications better. And I think just going forward, for the questions that we ask year to year, it would be helpful to have that summary in the slides about, did the 3 priorities of what we advocate to the province on, did that change? If we're asking these questions again, where have we succeeded in shifting that public opinion? So I think next time around, just having that longer runway, as you said, trying to get at those equity questions about who's filling out our survey, and then helping council see if we've got any trends developing one way or the other. But it's always helpful to see this, and I know council will take it into their deliberations on the budget. And hopefully any candidates who are listening online that might be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Hey, Harley, can you see if anyone's participating online?
We can see that there's no one in the participants panel, but we can't see from the streaming. People could be
Right.
streaming it.
People could be streaming it. Okay. So that we will move on to our general operating fund. Ms. Boxrud?
Thank
Mr.
you, Mayor
Russell?
Elliott. So thank you, Ms. Moore and Mr. Fordham and Council. We will now move on to the 2023 to 2027 general fund operating budget. All right, so the 2023 to 2027 financial plan faced significant financial pressures, which included the following. An unprecedented 4 labor contracts are contemplated in the 2023 fiscal alone. To put this into context, this is all of the labor contracts that the district has and includes the first ever RCMP union agreement, the IAFF, or International Association of Firefighters negotiations that finished in 2022, BC Transit's recent labor negotiations, and the Canadian Union of Public Employees, or CUPE's contract, which will begin discussions here very soon. The 2023 to 2027 budget incorporates a realistic estimate of inflationary costs across the organization and maximizes the budget reductions to balance these significantly climbing costs. And then finally, the 2023 to 2027 financial plan incorporates the cost of the district's significant facilities investments, which are the costs of the 2 fire halls, the public works building, the transit maintenance facility, and the municipal hall at the end of the financial plan. So staff have made tremendous efforts to reduce costs and minimize the impacts to the taxpayer in all areas of the organization. I just want to highlight a few of the key efforts made so council is aware of what staff has done to produce this manageable financial plan during these challenging times. So firstly, as discussed during the capital review back in July, staff have gone through and reprioritized several projects and delayed several projects where possible to minimize the year-over-year spend. Significant effort was made to reduce the operating budgets to do more with less and absorb inflation wherever possible. So rather than simply adding inflation to the overall budget, staff looked at where they could absorb it in their current budget. In 2021, staff introduced the temporary borrowing bylaws to accompany all the debenture instrument bylaws. So this allows staff to utilize temporary borrowing during the construction phase in smaller increments rather than going to long-term debt issuance for the full project cost, which is a mechanism to smooth in the debt repayment load. Temporary borrowing also doesn't require principal repayment, so it's a very effective tool in smoothing in debt payment over time. Staff have maximized this option throughout the 2023 to 2027 financial plan wherever possible, and doing so utilizing the cash flow forecasting and forecasted project construction timelines. Significant ask and commitments for resources in RCMP, fire department, and transit, bless you, have been pre-committed throughout the year. Therefore, staff have put tax-funded service level requests on hold for now, for the time being, just to hedge against those pre-committed requests. However, a word of caution: in a growing community with added service level expectations, this method is not sustainable in the long run. It is a direct reaction to inflation and in this challenging budget year. However, staff do feel it's manageable at this time. Introduced in 2022 is the use of the tax stabilization, which is to bring forward monies unspent of prior years as a credit toward the future budgets and is a smoothing methodology commonly used by local governments to reduce and smooth in tax impacts year over year. This is made only possible with adequate savings in the general operating reserve and systematic scheduled investment in reserve building and asset management program. Finally, staff have made significant efforts in maximizing funding opportunities, including utilizing the external funding and partnerships, anticipating additional revenues, namely building permit revenues, to offset costs, utilizing provisions such as the protective services provision and the community amenity contribution where possible to assist in smoothing and funding and reducing the impact on the taxpayer. So in terms of the general fund operating summary, we are incredibly proud of this financial plan and what staff were able to accomplish in these challenging times. Staff have managed a 4.7 to 6.2% tax revenue requirement year over year, which includes 2 to 3% of the non-market change each year. To note on non-market change, it is an estimated amount, and it's based on historical and future development trends. So there is a margin for error there, and we have yet to really see an organization that really truly does this estimate well. It's not an exact science and incorporates a lot of moving parts, so including development timing, permissive tax exemption granting, new industries being added or removed, and legislation changes. This budget contemplates significant investments in facilities, so 1 to 2% tax revenue requirement each year. That is to support the construction of the fire halls, the public works building, the transit maintenance building, and the municipal hall buildings as outlined in the real estate and facilities master plan. Also, there is some significant investment in transit route expansion contemplated in this financial plan. The district has recently updated the asset management plan, and what it told us is just like other municipalities, the district does lag behind in our infrastructure investment and reserve building towards those future investments. We have been told from the consultants, however, that we are in good stead or in pretty good shape amongst our peers. This budget contemplates beginning the process of right-sizing that deficit and building back the capital and equipment reserves to align with the asset management program over the long term. Just a note on the financial plan forecast. This is the forecast we have with the information we have to date, and it's subject to change over time. Costs will change, the timing of facilities will change, inflation will change, tax rolls will change, and the assessment base will change. So the long-term perspective is really to give the community and council with a holistic view and insight into the future and what we can expect in terms of investment requirements and clarity into the future tax impacts. So with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Russell to walk you through the details of the 2023-2027 financial plan. And just to note that we do have many staff online, so if you have any questions on specifics of the budget, please feel free to call on them.
Councillor Race has a question before you get going, Mr. Russell.
Just to clarify, the tax stabilization, if we had a surplus, I'll just pick an example, say in protective services from the policing contract or something like that. When you say it's used for future tax smoothing, is it confined to that area or it could be used for sewer, water and drainage or something of that nature? It can jump around?
Through you, Mayor. Great question. So in terms of the protective services, that specific overage goes into the protective services provision. However, within the general fund specifically, it all goes into the overall surplus together into the general operating reserve. Utilities, however, stay with utilities. So the specific funds stay within the specific funds, but general operating reserve, with the exception of protective services, it all goes together.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. My name is Roland Russell. I'm Senior Financial Analyst with the District of Squamish, and I'm going to walk you through some highlights of the general fund, our non-discretionary summary, and then also on to the service level changes. So we've broken the non-discretionary costs into three components. One is inflationary, growth related, and then capital construction costs. And we'll go through each of these individually. And then at the end of that, we'll pause and answer questions. So with respect to the non-inflationary, I should say not non-inflationary, inflationary, non-discretionary, my problem. It comes out to $247,000. It's made up of a number of different items. As you can see, we've highlighted some of the larger ones. Increases in gasoline and fleet, increases in supplies related to horticultural supplies and fertilizer, and increases in costs for snow and ice supplies from an inflationary perspective. And in addition to that, increase in costs, operations, and maintenance of the recreation center. So these are areas where management has specifically identified cost pressures which could not be absorbed within the remainder of their budgets. And so we've added specifically additional funding for that. And as I'm sure you can see here and are aware, just based on what's going on out there in the rest of the world, there's significant pressures occurring worldwide in a number of these areas related to fossil fuels and fertilizer, etc. So it's not just here. This is the result of worldwide events coming home to Squamish. As outlined by Ms. Boxrud, we have a number of labor contracts that have come up at this point in time. And to be fair, it's rather rare for this many specific contracts to all more or less come due at the same time. So a bit of a perfect storm, but it does happen every so often. So this is what we get. So there are a number of different areas. We've highlighted them here. It should be noted that although we had anticipated increases in the RCMP costs, the results of the final settlement of the RCMP contract were higher than we had originally anticipated, or in fairness, have been estimated by the RCMP last year when we did the last run of the budget and were attempting to forecast what these costs would be. Again, with respect to QP or IAFF, I always get the A's and the F's mixed up there. Those are increases that are for a fire department. I mean, that's negotiated. For QP, that's an estimate. It's an anticipation of what we feel may be appropriate as we move into the future. The cost of living increases for remaining staff, that would be for exempt and for library, which currently have contracts which are ongoing. We'd like to make some comments with respect to growth-related non-discretionary. A very significant increase here is the annualization of prior year's service level changes. And this is the result of our ongoing attempts to smooth in the costs of additional staffing or additional services over time, rather than trying to jump all of the hurdle in 1 year. We often stretch it out over 2 or 3 years as we try to smooth in the overall costs and in that way manage the overall tax pressures. So that's a very significant amount, but that's the result of smoothing, I guess is the best way to put it. The other item that we should add is with respect to tax stabilization. In the presentation of the 2022 budget, we included tax stabilization, but we didn't adjust the base budget from the perspective of rate calculations, future rate calculations. So there's an add back required for the first year. And then in the future, those numbers the base will be adjusted to reflect the fact that tax stabilization has been included. So this is kind of a one-off. It just gets us up over the hump.
Mr. Russell? Can you go back and explain that again?
Yes. I
How we
can.
got to 700K?
In the 2022 financial plan, there was a surplus in funding, a surplus in the 2020 budget, and we brought forward $700,000 or approximately 2% to reduce cost pressures, tax pressures in the 2022 through 26 I should say, financial plan. As a result of that, we've used this amount, but it's not ongoing. So we have to adjust the base to reflect the fact that in the following year, there will be an automatic tax increase to offset the stabilization that was used in the past. So it's similar to non-market change in that it doesn't change the overall amount of taxes that are required. It simply is an adjustment in the alignment of tax. So when we go and we speak about taxes being paid in total versus taxes being paid by existing property owners, we want to exempt the portion being paid by existing property owners with respect to tax stabilization. So you don't pay it this year, but you will be paying it in the future, right? Because tax stabilization is a one-off type of adjustment. So I hope that adds clarity.
Councillor Race?
Thank you. So in this particular example, we're putting back, in effect, into the 23 budget, $700,000, which is coming from, for lack of a better word, surplus from 22. But we also historically have taken those surpluses and surpluses and put them into different reserves or things like that. So when we do add that back, and I know we are generally speaking below the levels we want to get to for our various reserves, do we ever pay it back? Does it, or do we ever go to a point where we somehow try to get that $700,000 back and put it into a reserve? Or do we just say, no, it's one time, we drop it down and we'll try to build it up some other way?
What this is anticipating, or what we are doing with this add back, is that in the 2022 tax year, we came up with a targeted amount of tax revenue requirement, overall revenue requirement to be supported by tax. We reduced that amount by $900,000 based on prior year's surpluses. And that occurred in 2022. So we've spent that money in 2022. We were accessing the reserve to allow us to reduce future year's taxes. But subsequent to that, we then have to increase the amount that we receive from our taxpayers in the future, because that's a one-off. So in 2023, we're adding it back. And the adjustment that we're talking about here, really what happens is we didn't adjust the base in 2022 to 2023. So now we're resetting the base for 2023 and future years. So you will only see this add back of tax stabilization once. Okay.
But the expression we sometimes hear in budget is borrowing from reserve. And so is this considered, in which case very often we borrow from reserve and we have some plan or some idea of when we might refund or pay back that reserve. Is this one of those situations, or is this just, that's what the reserve is for? It comes down and we just carry on?
I'll give this one a shot. Excuse me. Through the mayor. So this isn't really a borrowing from reserves sort of situation. What this is money's in one given fiscal unspent, then utilized to bring down the tax in a future year. Now, had we not done that, it would go to reserve. However, what we're doing is basically utilizing it as a credit, saying, okay, well, we've taxed the taxpayer. We now have some surplus. Well, let's bring that forward into a future year. Now, what Mr. Russell's trying to say is that that is money that has been paid for by something else. So you need to add it back in that next year to say, okay, we have to reset the base. Here we are. Now we've got another tax stabilization from another prior surplus. We'll add that. And that's where they offset and net neutral. And eventually you do want to wean off. And these are the situations where, you know, when you have these additional cost pressures through inflation, through, you know, facility investment, this is where you want to utilize that mechanism to smoothen the taxes and then slowly bring that tax stabilization down until you are at, you know, your zero, basically, until we have another bout of inflation or another facilities. And it's just truly a tool to balance off and to try to smooth in tax impacts when we have some of these bigger areas. Now, the thing with the general operating reserve, which is what we put together in this last year or so, is that we've developed minimums and maximum thresholds. Now we've met that minimum threshold in the general operating reserve. So we're feeling quite comfortable that we can utilize this surplus. If it was in a different situation where we were really depleted on our general operating reserve, we might be choosing to or recommending to council, hey, you know what, you really want to put this into the general operating reserve rather than reducing tax. Hopefully that helps.
Councillor Stoner?
Thank you. Through the chair, just on this item, I thought we had a principle in our financial planning that we use surpluses and accumulated surplus for special operating projects predominantly and not ongoing operational components so that we can kind of avoid this from happening. So can you speak to a little bit about that principle and where we are today?
Sure. So through the chair, that is around the general operating reserve utilization, not the surplus necessarily. So that's just to sort of monitor and say, okay, well, we have enough in our general operating surplus. Let's add some additional things that we want to do. So they might not be, you know, in the normal trajectory of the strategy, or there may be perhaps supplementing the strategy, but probably not in the regular course. This is utilizing surplus as a tax credit to smooth in over more challenging times.
All right, continue.
Thank you very much. And thank you for that clarification, Ms. Boxroot. We'll jump on to the next item. This is a long list of various miscellaneous revenue and expense changes. I'm not going to attempt to read this off because it was included in your report. We do want to highlight a couple of things that are, we think, of specific interest. One is the last item there, building permit revenue. We've increased building permit revenue by approximately, well, not by approximately, by $500,000. Year over year, building permit revenue has been amazingly resilient. We acknowledge the fact that development will eventually slow down, and when that occurs, that will have a lull in our building on the ongoing increase, let's say, in building permit revenue. But at this point in time, over the last few years, building permit revenue has maintained its strength. And so we think that this is fair and reasonable to increase the amount, our projected revenue from this source. There's a number of other puts and takes, as you can see here, commitments that the organization has made over time, new buildings being opened, increases in, you know, operating expenses related to capital projects that we've undertaken, whether they be fire hall or whether it be responses to TTP, where we now built in additional IT licenses, for example. So there's a number of different things that the organization has had to take on over time to allow itself to maintain its level of service as we move forward. So this is a long list of them. And obviously, if you have specific questions, please feel free to ask.
Mr. Russell? Sometimes when the community sees the negative number, they think it's a negative thing. And then your words say, but there's been gains in building permit
Sorry.
revenue, but there's a negative. And I just wonder if, so we've been at this table a while, but just for the community, why it's expressed as a negative on this list when it sounds like a positive.
Okay. The reason that it's expressed as a negative on this list is that from an accounting standpoint, revenues are viewed as negative and expenses are viewed as positive. So when you spend money, that's a plus, and when you receive money, that's a negative. It's just kind of a funky accounting thing. So I know it seems a little backward, but that is the truth of the matter. So this is just how we represent these numbers. So when you see a negative, that is an increase in revenue or a reduction in expense. So
Thank you. And with that building on that explanation, I hope, does this set a new baseline for the expectation there, or is this viewed as a blip in our current, or how are you considering that?
I wouldn't anticipate that we should expect to see $500,000 increases in building permit revenue on an ongoing basis. I think that we've now got it up to a level that is that we anticipate is sustainable over the short to medium term. What I would anticipate, and to be fair, it's a bit of a mug's game because we're guessing as we look out into the future. At some point in time, it would be anticipated that development will slow down and these revenue streams will start to recede. And as that comes upon us, as we move through the remainder of this decade, we hope to be able to judge the timing of that accurately. And so at this point, I think we can see that there's sustainable revenue, so we're going to use it. And we acknowledge the fact that at some point in time, there's a reasonable potential that the economy will slow down and our revenue stream will recede. So this is a bit of a bonus, I guess is the best way to put it.
Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah. Sense of it's $500,000. Sorry, we increased our fees for building permits. Do we have a sense of how much of this increase in revenue is due to more permits versus higher fees?
It's a bit anecdotal in that it's a little hard to judge. Inputs tend to be lumpy. So, for example, if you get a large development like Red Bridge, for example, comes on stream, then you would expect to see a significant increase in the level of revenue. I would go so far as to suggest that of this $500,000 increase, probably 300,000 is related to the increase in rates, and probably the other 200,000 is related to an increase in overall volumes.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. I'm wondering if there's somebody from staff who can speak to the rationale for keeping the campground closed into 2023 and the balance between the lost revenue of 55,000 and potential cost savings in doing so. It can also be brought back at a later date if that's a more complex question.
Could we bring that back if that's okay? And we'll certainly circle around to the appropriate managers when we have an opportunity. So on to capital construction costs. We've broken this down into three components. The first one is a reduction in debt servicing costs related to expiring debt. And that was approximately $265,000. The big one there is we finished paying off the debt for the RCMP building. And so that is probably $240,000 of this. The other items that you're seeing is increase in debt servicing costs related to infrastructure, and that's because although there have been delays in the timing of these various projects, we're anticipating that this will include additional costs for TTP, additional costs for diking, additional costs that have already been committed, and where we've extended debt in the last year or two, whose bylaws have come before council and been approved. So that's infrastructure related, and by that we're referring to not facilities. And then the last one is very specific. That is the additional cost of the remainder of the debt financing associated with Valley Cliff Fire Hall to complete that project. Okay, so it's not cheap. It's a very nice new building, which opened recently, but it does cost money. So then we want to talk about
Mr. Russell, all these numbers are across the whole financial plan. They're not annual numbers. These are 2023 to 2027.
these costs that you are seeing that we're talking about. The total of all this, $460,000, that is an increase between 2022 and 2023. Okay, if we bring in additional assets in 24 or 25, such as the second fire hall or public works, those costs will continue to rise. So we want to talk about tax supported projects. So here in 2022, we taxed just under $300,000 for direct tax support for special operating projects. That went down to just under $200,000 in 2023. So there is a reduction in tax support for special operating projects of just over $100,000. We want to note that the tax support for capital projects is preset and is now annualized at $1.5 million per year. And then future growth of tax support for capital projects will be aligned with the amounts determined through our asset management program. Lastly, we've got a number of service level changes. Well, the service level changes that we have highlighted, there are 5 in total and 4 that you see on the screen today. In front of you, our CMP resource update, increased fire department, additional strength as a result of fire department's new contract and expansion of service. Transit expansion. There was a transit expansion which was approved and agreed in 2022 due to COVID and timing on behalf of BC Transit. They requested that transit expansion be delayed a year, and so now the impact of that transit expansion is occurring in 23 and into 24. So we have some additional costs there, and we've also increased some dollars to allow for the phase-in of corporate training initiatives. The other item that you don't see on this list, which makes up a significant portion of the service level changes of $1 million, which is the annualization impact, which is going to flow into 2024, is there's $300,000 associated with increased parks expenditures, and that's associated with the openings of the new waterfront and oceanfront parks. So we're going to have to increase staff and equipment to manage those additional parks. In addition to this, as we had outlined in one of the resolutions, the fire department's costs have been phased in. They've been smoothed over the next 2 years. So in 2024, you will also see a significant increase associated with the cost of fire services. And that is not that the fire services aren't increasing now. It's that we have used the reserve to smooth in the longer term impact of that. You'll also see an increase in transit costs as the annualization of this transit expansion, which will occur in September. And in 2024, it'll be for the remainder of the 8 months. So there's some significant pressure created both by what we're doing in the short term in 2023 and also longer term and our attempts to smooth this in. So with that,
I've got
I
a few questions here.
will pause.
Councilor Hurford, then Councilor Pettingill.
Thank you. With that transit expansion piece that was delayed from 2022, did we not tax for it in 2022? And how does that relate?
We did not tax for it in 2022. We reduced the budget in the spring budget amendment because we were informed by BC Transit that there would be a delay.
Yeah, thank you. We recently approved a transit future plan, and I was anticipating seeing higher numbers in terms of transit expansion here based on that plan. But am I looking at the wrong line items, or am I confused about where those will show up or when they show up?
The transit plan that was presented to council includes expansions in 23 and 24 and 25. Each of those expansions are span over 2 years. So what you're seeing here is the expansion that was previously approved. That will occur in 23, fall of 23, and into 2024. The other two expansions occurring in 24 and 25 have been identified in your package. And so we've identified they're roughly $500,000 each, give or take. We've identified those costs as related to future transit expansion, but they are not part of the existing financial plan between 23 and 27. We have not increased the overall transit operating expenses to reflect those things. If council chooses to add those, we can do so.
So, sorry, does that mean then we sort of identified that there's a plan that conceives of this, but we haven't built it into our financial planning yet, and that would be the next step if we want to follow through? Is that what I'm understanding?
That would be correct, and I think that there's two key elements in that. One is that with the 3-year transit MOU, it's brought to council in spring and summer, and council has an opportunity to review it, and then it's brought back for final ratification. I understand this correctly, in the fall, in October, when transit has had an opportunity to update and finalize their numbers. And I think it is at that point in time that council would make a final decision as to whether or not they wish to include the expansions associated with years 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 in the financial plan. So there would be an opportunity. It has not been included in the tax impact values that you see in this package.
Councilor French, then Councilor Stoner.
Thanks, Mayor. The perfect storm of union contracts. I'm not familiar with the lengths of each of these individual contracts. Should we be worried some years down the road we're going to have another perfect storm because they all end at the same time, or are they staggering naturally and varied on their own?
Shall we say we're crossing our fingers that they're all going to stagger themselves? But part of that, to be fair, is some are within our control, some are outside of our control. So the long-term contract requirements for BC Transit and the transit union, that's outside of our control. The RCMP, that's outside of our control. QP and IAFF are inside our control, and therefore we ought to be able to build those in so they don't automatically end in the same period. Now, I'm not a labor negotiator, so I can't speak to it beyond that. I would just say that they are within our control, and hopefully we will try not to overlap them.
Through the chair, just trying to reconcile the numbers up here with the table in our package on page 15, the financial plan tax impacts. In that table, the service level change for 2024 is at 0%, whereas here we have $1 million. So I'm just curious if that's falling into a different line in that table, and if so, where is it falling? I'm guessing it's non-discretionary, but I'm just trying to figure out what the percentage tax impact is of that $1 million in 2024.
Through the mayor, the answer is yes. It moves from service level change to non-discretionary, because once this service level change has been approved, future impact of this service level change is now a non-discretionary cost impact upon the district.
Okay, thank you. And then my other clarifying point was the proposal to use the public safety provision to phase in the fire department additional strength. I think part of the rationale for creating that provision was to kind of help buffer the RCMP union negotiations and the future tax implications of that. So I just want to make sure that we are able to cover both off with the provision that we have, or if by using this with the firefighters, it puts us at risk of not being able to cover the RCMP costs.
Finance is comfortable that we are not putting the district at additional jeopardy. We believe that with the staffing pattern that we've seen occurring so far this year, we anticipate that there will be a small shortfall in total staffing with respect to the RCMP, and so we will be able to replenish the RCMP component of the reserve, and therefore we feel that we would be in a place where we can use this money to support fire services.
Also, FCM is still advocating that local governments pay none of the back pay costs. So we're still waiting for a decision on that. And I know the lobbying continues on that front. Okay, Mr. Russell, let me check in with you. How many slides do you have left? Because I'm just looking at our time and I'm trying to manage these folks up here.
We can go directly to the discussion if you would like. We had one slide, but I think all the information is in your package and wasn't a whole lot for me to highlight on that slide. So
well, for the public, why don't you finish your slides and then I'll open it up for discussion. Okay.
For the mayor, I'd be happy to. So the last slide that we have in our package is just showing the next 3 years of tax impacts and what we are anticipating tax impacts, and we just wanted to be able to highlight some of the things that are coming toward the district as we move forward. So in 2023, as we'd said, it's 5.9%, which equates to $139 in the average residential home. In 2024, it's being pushed to a significant amount as a result of our growth-related non-discretionary, which effectively is the $1 million of annualization from approval of the existing, that's 2023, service level change. So result of parks, transit, fire, police. We're looking at a fairly significant bump in 2024 to the tune of probably 3%. So in 2024, our numbers are looking at 6.2% and $155,000. You'll also note that this is anticipating roughly 2% plus in capital construction costs, well, roughly 1% for both facilities and 1% for other infrastructure. And that other infrastructure, for the most part, would reflect the completion of the Honek Sea Dike. And in 2025, we're looking at ongoing inflationary pressures of approximately 3%, which is more or less the norm, but certainly lower pressures with respect to growth-related non-discretionary, bringing the overall value down to roughly 5.3% or back to $139 on the basis of an average residential. Again, we're looking at very significant amounts of debt servicing, both on the infrastructure side and on the facilities side. And in this instance, you're starting to see the facilities costs ramp up because that's the impact of second fire hall and starting to see the impact of public works. So there's we've got a number of very large facilities that we're going to build over the next few years. And as a result, we're going to be looking at fairly significant tax increases over the next few years to pay for these facilities. So we hadn't built a lot of facilities in the past decade or two. And so now we are planning to catch up, and it's time to pay the bill. So we're just letting public know that yeah, there will be ongoing cost pressures as we move forward. Thank you. That was the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. I've got Councillor Race, then Councillor Pegna.
Thank you. Just in that last point, does this take into account retiring debt expenses that will no longer be incurred, such as we are seeing this year with the RCMP building? And secondly, do those numbers consider future non-market change estimates, anticipating growth to increase at some level?
Through the chair, to answer your questions, Councillor Race, yes, it does anticipate reductions in future debt. Unfortunately, we don't have any significant debt dropping off in the next 5 years. We have one large item, that was the RCMP building, it's done. There really isn't anything that's tax supported that's going to fall off in the next 5 or 6 years, I believe, between now and 2027. So we're not going to get a lot of savings on that side. Second, we are projecting a 3% non-market change in 2023. Then we are reducing the non-market change from 3% to 2% in years subsequent to that, 24, 25, 26, et cetera. The reason being is that non-market change is an estimate, and we want to be prudent with respect to what we anticipate our overall resource requirements are going to be. So rather than, take a flyer that development just keeps on going crazy, and therefore we get lots of extra money, we think it would be more prudent to suggest that at some point in the future it will slow down. So if we're off and in 2024 we're able to maintain that 3% non-market change, then the value that you would see there would drop, the tax requirement from existing ratepayers.
And with the debt, this is typically financed over 20 years. Is that our usual pattern? At any time, is it prepayable in whole or in part, or are we locked in for 20 years? If we had from some source or extra funds, if there was reserves that had more money in them than we thought they might need, would we have the option of putting it against debt?
The answer to that question is yes. The debt forecast is based on 20 years for all three of the facilities that we're referring to. So Fire Hall 1, Fire Hall 2, Public Works. And yes, we can retire debt through MFA prior to its full expiry. There are mechanisms within the agreements that we have with MFA to allow us to do that.
Councillor Pegna.
Yeah, I have a couple different questions. The one, there's a business analyst for rec services, and I'm not clear if this is tech support and training, or is this about sorting out requirements and implementation for new features and modules as part of TPS at rec services?
I see Mr. Cordell has appeared on screen. Happy for you to answer that, Conrad.
Yeah, through the mayor, I can speak to that. Yeah, the business analyst is there to support the product as it is currently, but they're also there to work with the business unit to make improvements, to work on upgrades, to add new functionality and features, to make sure things are tested properly. It is a product that's going to grow with the organization, and it's so there will be there will be work continuing to make the product better and to add features and improvements. So that really requires a dedicated resource that works with that team on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you. And then going back to the non-market change, do we have the ability, you mentioned that we're going from 3% down to 2% in future years as our estimate. Is that sort of at the granularity of it just can't stay at 3% forever, so we're going to drop it down? Or do we have the capacity to sort of understand that, well, there's a recession, there's been inflation, and in these conditions, you typically see a 30%, 33% reduction, and so that's the number we're shooting for?
Through the chair, I wish we had a better crystal ball, would probably be a good way to put it. Non-market change, it does fluctuate with development, with timing of development, and also the amount of development. So it can go up or down depending on whether or not a large block of development comes on stream. And so we've done our best based on our understanding of what's in the pipeline and what we anticipate will be coming. And so we feel that there's been a couple fairly large increments over the last 2 to 3 years. It's been at 3% or higher. And that's kind of taken some of the larger projects off the table now. Like they've passed that first hurdle. So we anticipate that there will be a natural slowdown as we move forward. But to be fair, we don't really know the timing of that. It's kind of up to people outside of our direct control.
Is it fair to say that non-market change is a drug you shouldn't get addicted to?
Probably yes.
Do you have any more questions? Go ahead.
So earlier in the presentation, we heard one of the ways we're managing some of the cost changes is doing more with less. But just sort of reflecting back over the last couple of years, I think a coping mechanism for many people seems to have been going to just a doubling down on the amount of work being done. And we've seen high stress levels and burnout and all that sort of thing. And we've certainly seen, despite the pandemic, a great deal of productivity and work at the district. We've also done work to make sure permit response times comes down and so on. So I'm just wondering, as we're doing more with less, do we have a sense of where we are on the line of pushing too hard, too far, burning people out and so on? Are we sort of in a good safe zone and we can afford to push a bit more? Or I'm just wondering if I can have some comfort or some sense of where we think we are.
I'll direct that question to the CAO.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. For clarity around the do more with less, really, I think what our CFO was trying to say is really focusing on our priorities as opposed to doing superfluous work with resources we can't spare. Our message to staff is not continue to do more with less. We are, as you mentioned, so astutely still recovering from the pandemic and really quite concerned about burnout and people's resilience. As part of our strategy as the CLT, we've got raccoons with power tools up on the roof. I'll steal that from Robin. Part of our strategy with the CLT heading into the next council is ensuring that our capacity matches the strategic plan, the organizational plan, and the goals going forward. But it is a great question, and thanks for allowing me to clarify that no, we are not pushing people to do more with less. in the literal sense as much as it is prioritize, focus. We can't ask for more resources right now, so focus on the priorities.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, follow-up question on the non-market change. If I remember correctly, last year's non-market change was below 3%. And we're forecasting into 2024 that'll be below 3%. So I'm just curious why we've included 3% in the 2023 budget and why we feel confident with that estimate.
Well, last year it was 2.9. So we think it was pretty close to 3. Okay. Oh, sorry. So I'm hearing 2.98. So there you go. So we're pretty close to 3. We're looking at what we're seeing development wise this year. And so the indication we're getting from that is that with that amount of development, we should anticipate that a lot of those developments will close, quote, like, well, open is probably a more appropriate term, but from an assessment standpoint, they will come onto the market in 2022. So we think that there's a pretty good chance that we will meet that 3% this year. Now, there are some vagaries related to other things, people being exempt or not exempt or PTEs, et cetera, that could adjust those numbers, but that's our best guess at this point.
That's helpful. I think going back to the mayor's comment, the year before we were in the high 6s, I think. And so I was just shocked to see a 2 the following year, even though it was closer to 3. My second question is going back to the tax stabilization policy and I guess our approach. I'm looking at the 5-year financial tax implications, and it looks like that's going to be a strategy that we're going to rely on for the next 5 years, slowly decreasing over time. I guess I'm just curious at how sustainable it is to continue to use it, especially for operating costs, and if there's any risk there to us in kind of the more medium term, if we don't wean ourselves off of it more quickly.
I think that there's always a risk that we could overestimate the amount of surplus we're going to have in any given year. I believe that historically we've been able to manage a surplus in that $300,000 to $600,000 range, $400,000 to $600,000 range historically, based on attrition, savings, based on timing of capital financing, things like that. So I would anticipate that would continue. Although we do acknowledge that, there are, just like the non-market change, I mean, it is an estimate, and it could go up or could go down. And because we've created a lag between the actual results and when the tax stabilization would become available, that gives us the ability to foresee, if we have a tight year, that there would not be an option to use tax stabilization in the future. So I hope that we can maintain that, but it is an up and down kind of question. I also see that the CFO would like to add.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Just to add to that, keep in mind the surplus in it historically has been really utilized to try to build up that general operating reserve. Now we've met that minimum threshold and we're comfortable utilizing it. So as Mr. Russell mentioned, I mean, we don't spend it before we have it. So we have that lag time in administrative. The year closes, the audit is complete, then the following budget we will utilize it. So it does minimize the risk significantly in that respect.
Okay, and then just one other question on the tax stabilization. To me, the 700,000 feels larger than normal. Like this year, we're looking at 500,000 for tax stabilization. I'm just wondering if that's a result from some of the deferrals or cost increases that we saw through COVID, or if there's something in particular that's driving it from last year.
Yes, there are things that are driving it specifically from previous years, because the $700,000 surplus that was being used for tax stabilization was based on 2020. So 2020 reflected a couple of things, specifically savings related to COVID, without question, were probably the single largest driving factor. The other aspect that occurred there is we had anticipated, probably COVID related and otherwise, that our capital plan would move forward a little faster. Okay, so we had built into our budget additional debt servicing associated with facilities, and those facilities were delayed. So we've seen capital construction delays both with CDIC and with Fire Hall 2 and Public Works. And as a result of that, those numbers in 2020 and in 2021, the debt servicing costs were lower than had been budgeted. So yeah, it was kind of a one-off. It was a higher number than we would normally anticipate in a given year, but so be it.
Okay, I know we still have one other item on this agenda that we need to get to, but just quickly, I know Ms. Gunn's on the phone, and the transit descriptions still mention Britannia Beach, although I know council directed that that was not going to be a priority. So I just wonder if we could update those. And then also, what is our comfort that the oceanfront will be ready and we'll have buses to service the oceanfront route in 2023?
Thank you for the question. For oceanfront, we are still working with the developer to try to figure out their timeline. We do have a number of different options we can pursue if they aren't ready in time. So we will bring that back to council before the decision is finalized. And I apologize, there was a first question. Could you repeat that first question?
Council deprioritized service to Britannia Beach, but it's still showing up in the budget description. So I just want to make sure that we align the budget descriptions with the direction council provided on the agreement with BC Transit.
Thank you. Yes, we'll make sure we make that change. It was changed in the MOU that was signed, so we'll make sure it's changed here in the budget as well.
All right, thank you. Council, you're going to get another chance to look at all of these again, but are there any final questions on the general operating fund or anything you've heard today? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Russell. So on our agenda, yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. The District of Squamish include the non-discretionary changes to the 2023-27 financial plan as presented in the report dated September 20th. Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any comments? Any opposed? Oh, sorry, did you put your hand up? Any opposed? Motion carries. That we include the service level changes to the 2023 to 2027 financial plan as presented by Financial Services on September 20th. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Herford. Any comments on this one? Any opposed? Motion carries. And that the District of Squamish use funds from the Protective Services provision to phase in the Squamish Fire Rescue service level changes in the 2023-27 financial plan. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Stoner. I've got Councillor Stoner, then Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Just on all three previous motions, happy to support them all. I want to thank staff for their due diligence in trying to find ways to be a little bit more lean and efficient in these trying times. We know that in our community, there's definitely inflationary pressures more broadly, but we're also feeling those at the district. And as we're seeing in many of the non-discretionary changes, increases to union contracts and things like that, that are understandable through the course of what we're living through economically at the moment. So appreciate staff's efforts to find ways to stabilize our taxation and the tax asks for this year. I think we'll have to, when the capital budget and the special operating projects come forward, make sure that we have a really keen eye to making sure that those impacts aren't too substantial, given that we have very limited discretion in these elements that we're seeing today. But happy to support the three motions. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson. I just want to thank staff for helping us see that long-term picture from 2023 all the way to 2027 and see all these different, the elements of our facilities and our non-discretionary changes and our service level changes and how that is playing out over the long term. I found that to be really helpful in understanding the decisions we're making today with these motions and how they impact the budget going forward. And I appreciate the good explanation of how we're trying to manage this extraordinary time of inflationary pressure and growth, and also trying to be responsible to the taxpayer. So thank you very much. With that, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. So next up, before we take a break, the pumper apparatus replacement, which is related to our budget. Because things just cost more now. So who am I turning over to? Over to you.
Are we having a break?
No, not yet. All budget, then a break.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Aaron Foote, Deputy Fire Chief with Squamish Fire. I'm here today to ask for a capital budget increase for the replacement of our 2004 pumper apparatus, which has reached the end of its useful service life. Bit of a background to this project. The 2022 capital budget included $1 million for the replacement of the 2004 American LaFrance pumper. The fleet replacement plan and the underwriter's survey call for the replacement of the apparatus between 15 and 20 years. This apparatus falls within that. The request for a proposal was issued in June of this year. We received 2 proposals. Both of them were over the $1 million mark. We went back to the proponents. They noted inflationary pressures and supply chain issues were a big part of the higher than expected pricing. Estimated funding for this apparatus is 1.38, so 1,380,000, and in that is a contingency of 15% to cover off unexpected inflationary challenges and design through the design process. The budget, so the 2022 capital budget for the replacement pumper is $1 million. However, we will require an estimated $380,000 to complete this replacement. It's included, or the additional budget amount would be included in the 2023-2027 financial plan for council approval, and funding is available in the capital reserve. So next steps, if council chooses to increase the budget, the district will finalize the evaluation process and present the successful bid to the CAO for approval. If approved, the pre-construction meetings would begin shortly after, and that's to ensure the completion by the end of 2023. And happy to answer any questions you may have.
I'll just come this way. Council Race, and then Hereford, then Pettingill.
Thank you. With the fleet replacement, I'm just thinking to experiences in the past. This is not an unusual occurrence. I can remember in my very first budget, there was, for a particular vehicle, there was $500,000 in the fund, and the cost was close to $1 million, and we had to top it up. But that money comes from somewhere, and I'm just wondering if we take this $300,000 out of the fund, does that leave a shortfall for the next one or the one after that, or how do we sort of balance this off?
Through the chair, my name is Roland Russell. I'd be happy to answer that question. Within the fleet reserve, the calculations, when we purchase a new asset with the fleet reserve, we incorporate the cost of that asset and the replacement of that asset within the mechanics of the ongoing reserve calculation. So currently, we would have had $1 million being replaced, paid back into the reserve over the future years. Now that number will increase from $1 million to $1.4 million, roughly. And as a result of that, we will then increase the amount of contribution to the fleet reserve over time to ensure that we've adequately replenished the reserve as we move forward.
Thank you. So in effect, we just upped the amount, the contributions from now going forward. The second question was the range of useful life of this vehicle is 15 to 20 years. And I think, excuse me, we're about 18 years. It's an 04 vehicle. We're in 2022. Is there any advantage, or have you considered delaying the purchase for 1 year when we might not have these troubles that are kind of, supply chain issues and things of that nature that are kind of plaguing us at this point? Has that been considered?
Mayor, through to council. Yes, we did consider that. The fire underwriters derate the apparatus after 20 years. It is expected to take between 1 year and 2 years to construct the truck. Unfortunately, with the supply chain issues currently, we're seeing anywhere from 12 months to 2.7 years to construct an apparatus.
Councillor Herford.
Thank you. And forgive me, I don't know too much about what is actually on these vehicles. So I was curious around, I had delay, which you've just answered, and scope. Is the equipment on this mandated by the fire underwriter, or are there? I've heard about build processes. Are there things that are selected to be on there to meet the use? And has that scope? Do we have any ability to adjust the scope, or how do we land at the scope that we've landed on?
Through Mayor to council, yes, we have an apparatus committee that develops the scope. The scope of the truck is largely determined by the standards for the National Fire Protection Association. Standard is 1901 for fire apparatus, so it has to comply with that. And it's considered a very basic spec from the suppliers. So we have looked at ways to trim the budget, and we're basically at our basic level for replacement.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you can clarify if the underwriters decertify the truck in practical terms, what does that mean? And what would, if council was to say, well, we don't care, just keep it running until we find a better deal, what are the practical implications of that, or what would they be?
Thank you for the question. Through Mayor to council, definitely it's a bit of a gray area, but the fire underwriters survey have the ability to affect our insurance ratings for the district. So implications for that down the line could be a derating of our fire insurance, which would increase the cost to get fire insurance for each tenant and each owner of property within the district.
Okay, thank you. And this might be for our fleet team, but I understand we're reviewing the needs of our fleet reserve. I believe it's over the next year. And, I can understand that we can't buy an electric truck yet, practically, but I do worry that it may not be reasonable to plan for a 20-year lifespan for a diesel truck going forward. So we'll sort of thinking about how long we can keep this new truck. Is that part of that fleet analysis work, or is that part of sort of this planning?
We asked for the fleet analysis to be done with the climate lens on it, and that will come back to council when it's done. So no, not yet, because it hasn't gone back to council. It's a decision for another day. Councillor Stoner?
Thank you, through the chair. Just curious what happens to the 2004 truck. Is there any opportunity to sell it? I know Britannia will be looking for fire trucks soon and Furry Creek. But if we can't use it, can somebody else use it?
That's a great question. Mayor, through to council, we will be retaining the truck as a backup unit. So the fire underwriters survey do give it a half credit. And so we'll be retaining it. We often have trucks out of service for maintenance repairs. So we'd be keeping it over a few years to keep it as a replacement truck to fill in when we do have downtime on other apparatus.
Great. So council, the motion in front of us is that the district increase the budget for the replacement of the 2004 American LaFrance pumper apparatus by $308,000 and direct staff to include the amended budget in the 2023-2027 financial plan. And again, that's not a tax ask, that's coming from reserves. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Race. Any further comments? Seeing none, any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for coming.
Great, thank you all.
All right, council motion to close. Councillor Herford, second by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. So we will take a 15-minute break and come back at 2:50.